Jasmine, Shadrack and Charmaine, Sonnex, presenting on ritual occultation and the space between worlds, exploring the application of the flow state in pagan and black metal performance practice.
Hello, so I just realised we possibly should have put that in the order we were presenting and not alphabetical order.
Yeah.
So I'm Charmaine Sonnex. I'm from the School of Psychology, and as part of my PhD I've been investigating pagan healing spell practices. And one of the things that came through for me was that the state of awareness that people reach and try to attain in pagan ritual is what's known as flow. So, there we go. So what is flow? Flow is an altered state of consciousness. I'll talk about how it's not entirely altered, it's a slightly misleading term, but it's an altered state of consciousness, and it's described by Csikszentmihalyi, who developed the term, as the holistic experience that people feel when they act with total involvement. In flow, experience seamlessly unfolds from moment to moment. The individual operates at full capacity. The state is one of dynamic equilibrium. And so this, in kind of layman's terms, is essentially when you're in the zone. When you're fully engaged in what you're doing, you lose all sense of time, all sense of yourself. Everything is effortless, and it all just works. So psychology obviously came up with a term, something we're all familiar with, and that's flow. So the characteristics, as I said before, it's an intense and focused concentration. You are entirely absorbed in what it is that you are doing. A merging of action and awareness. You really don't have to put any effort into trying to do whatever you have to do. As soon as you think, well, I need to do that, it happens. I didn't need to do that. There is a loss of reflective self-consciousness. So, that's right. So this is, you lose all sense of yourself. You can no longer identify as an individual separate in the world. You are just entirely absorbed in what you are doing. A sense that you can control your own actions. Whatever's thrown at you, you can kind of handle. A distortion of temporal experience. So as I said before, you lose all sense of time. I get this when I'm reading. You know, I'm entirely absorbed in what I'm doing. I think it's been half an hour. I look up and it's been about 4 hours or something. And it's an autotelic activity. That is, this is an activity that you do purely for the sake of doing it. Now, flow does occur across a range of different activities, and often these are activities that we do because we have to as well. But it also occurs in situations that we do for no apparent reason other than we enjoy them, and often this is an attribute of flow. So there are certain conditions to flow. So as I said, it works. It occurs across play and work settings. So flow is something that we see a lot of in sports, for example, in meditation, in computer games. Actually, there's an awful lot of research on flow in computer games. But we also see it in things like surgery and all sorts of other settings. So it's not limited. It's something that we see in kind of all realms of human experience. And the activity has to be one that stretches your existing skills. So there's a diagram there, and you see on the long axis the challenge level between high and low, and the skill level between high and low. And it's that kind of sweet spot where you're not so under-challenged that you're bored, but you're not so over-challenged that you just can't do it. There's that nice kind of balance. And also, it's not so easy, again, that you're bored. So we see if the challenge is low and the skill level is required to do it is low, you just feel apathetic. And if it's high, but the challenge level is high, you kind of feel relaxed. If there's that balance between the stretching of your skills and the challenge, that's kind of where flow exists. And you need to have clear proximal goals and immediate feedback about the progress that's being made. So you have to have a goal in mind. There has to be something that you're trying to achieve, whether that's kind of beating the boss level or trying to score a goal or, trying to get a paper written by the deadline. But you need to have immediate feedback as well. And this doesn't necessarily have to be about kind of the quality of your work, but actually just being able to see progress. So if you're writing a paper, seeing how much you've written, seeing what's there. If you're beating the boss, seeing the kind of, life level go down, that sort of thing. So these all kind of feed into the experience of flow, and without these, we don't really achieve it. So how does this fit in with pagan ritual spell work? Well, this is nice. I'm probably telling this to people who know all about it. But pagan ritual and spell work, it's essentially a mental exercise rather than a physical one. And it's essentially raising, programming, and sending out of energy, regardless if it's for a specific purpose or if it's for praxis. That's the main intention. And this altered state of consciousness is an integral aspect. When I was interviewing practitioners, they basically said they needed to achieve this, and we see it a lot in Lerman, when she, in the Persuasions of the Witch's Craft, talks about it. Starhawk talks about it. It's everywhere that we need to reach this altered state of consciousness for ritual to actually be effective. And it's also, ritual is a creative process. It utilises the tools and symbology of personal significance to the practitioner. So all of this creates an incredibly immersive experience that that helps us to achieve flow, but also flow is the kind of aim of it. Essentially, this occurs in the magic circle. So this is the space between worlds. It's a liminal space that we're working in when we do magic. But it's also a liminal frame of mind. And this is why I kind of have a slight issue with the term altered state of consciousness, because I think altered state suggests kind of trance state, or, when you're under the influence of something and you are completely distance from your normal state of consciousness. And flow isn't like that. You're still lucid, you're still able to think. A different phrase I've heard is an alternative state of consciousness, and I think that works a lot better, because you're still able to comprehend things, you're still able to be aware of what's going on. So it's a liminal, to me it's a liminal state of mind, because you are not in your normal state of consciousness, but you're not so altered that you're out of it. And ritual really helps with this. So that the whole point of ritual is to try and achieve this state of flow. So we have the physical liminal space that reflects the liminal space in our mind that we're trying to achieve. And also the accoutrements of ritual basically have dual purpose. Not only are they kind of energetic correspondences, as someone was talking about earlier, but they also act as mnemonic devices to keep us focused on our aim, to help cultivate that singularity of focus. And a lovely quote from one of my practitioners when she talks about ritual, she says, "We do what we do in symbol and in miniature." And so there's all these different ways of helping to remind us of our purpose, and also to create this immersive atmosphere. So most obviously we have the kind of sensory tools that we use, candlelight, incense, maybe drumming. All of these things help to kind of take us out of that normal state of consciousness. There's temporal tools that we might use, so working in conjunction with the moon phases, possibly the day of the week, the hour of the day, depending on how deep you want to get into it. We have physical reminders. So if you're working for a purpose, usually you've got representations on the altar. So if you're casting for a specific person, you might have a figure of a person, you may have their photograph, an item that belongs to them to create that connection, constantly reminding you who you're doing this for. And there can be other things as well, the gods, the specific gods and goddesses, or the elemental beings, the angels, whoever that may be invoked. All of those not only help to add this kind of energetic power, but also to remind us of the purpose. Mm-hmm. And we see in the phenomenology of ritual, when practitioners talk to us about what ritual feels like, they are essentially describing flow. So all my practitioners chose their own pseudonyms, I'd like to point out. So Donkey says, specifically in rituals, you're focusing on things. And Greenwich says, people use ritual because it makes it easier to focus on the intent. The singularity intent is one of the key characteristics of flow. Rhiannon says, the ones that do work seem effortless. There is that merging of action and awareness. And Yarrowitch says, you've got to believe that you can do it and that it'll happen. If you don't actually think it's going to work, then it won't. But if you're absolutely certain that it's going to work, then it will. So she's talking about that challenge and that skill level. It's not beyond what you're capable of doing. So although this state of consciousness has been discussed in the literature around paganism, nobody's really identified it before as flow. And I think that it's important that we do so, because flow is something that's taken very seriously in the academy. It's, you know, it has legitimacy, and I think it's helpful to point out that actually this practice that is considered woo and all those other things by a lot in the academy actually does have value, and it's very important. And now I'll pass over to Jazz, who talks about how it's seen in other areas.
Great, thanks very much, Sham. Okay. So this...
It's still the same talk.
It's still the same talk, yeah. This is the panel paper. Okay, so on the slide here, I'm just reiterating a few points from Charmaine's previous slide, but the one that I particularly want to pick out here is that you've really got to believe in it if it's going to happen, and this is exactly the same if you are doing a live performance of any kind, particularly if you're on stage with a guitar in your hand screaming your head off, which is what I do. So you have to really think very hard about what your mindset is before you go into doing something like this. So how do I use any of these particular ideas here in my live musical performance? Okay, my name is Jasmine Shadrack. I'm a senior lecturer in popular music at the University of Northampton. I'm also the frontwoman and guitarist in Denigrata, which is an avant-garde black metal band whose video, directed by our very own Cavan McLaughlin, is part of the art installation here, which is just over there on the right-hand side. I'm also a survivor of domestic abuse, and this is the genesis point for my research, my performance, and my brilliant collaboration with Charmaine. In order to purge myself of my subjective experience of domestic violence, I started Denigrata. My band helped me to create a dark space for a dialogical performance to help me forge a locus of intent and effectively scream it all out. This I call my ritual occultation. Okay, so black metal is apophatic sonic obliteration. That functions through occult and pagan practice for live performance and its associated aesthetics. It exists within the subgenre of extreme metal and is preoccupied with an anti-Abrahamic ideological position, which often means an assimilation of pre-monotheistic spirituality as aesthetic content, often defined in the current literature as a neo-pagan shaman. Now, I quickly realised that during my band practice, recording and performances that I was accessing the flow state in order to embody my subjective transformation. So my research position uses interpretive performance autoethnography in order to identify how flow functions in my performance in Denigrata. On my journey of ritual occultation, this has included catharsis and a fiercely anti-patriarchal musical and aesthetic position, realised initially as apophatic liturgy and has presently come to rest within witchcraft. According to Niall Scott, he states, I am using the apophatic in the sense that black metal directs one to an understanding of the transcendent value of absence, nothingness, and ultimate meaninglessness grounding one's experience, where the enveloping noise of heavy metal refers to silence rather than silence and absence having utility to refer back to liturgy. Where one may be confronted with inadequacy of language because of the obsession of trying to refer to things, in black metal there is no inadequacy in this use of noise and articulation, as there is no claim being made in trying to refer to something, i.e. God, in this instance. Okay. Extending from this, Denigrata's album release, which is called Missa Defunctorum Requiem Mass in A minor, showcases 7 songs which follow a canonically traditional requiem format. So we have Requiem Aeternum, Kyrie eleison, Dies Irae, Rex Tremendae, Confutatis Maledictis, my personal favourite, Lacrimosa and Agnus Dei. Not only was this done as a subversive tactic, putting a traditionally Christian liturgy in the mouth of black metal performance, but requiems serve to pierce the veil between life and death. That is their function. As part of my occultation, Denigrata's occupation and the abyssic quality of a requiem has created something Scott calls abyss-topia, a clearly delineated ritual space where emptiness and nothingness are forged through the bodies and performance of living people actively embodying a dark space. I'm going to go back there. Okay. To push this point further, we performed our album launch by candlelight in a 900-year-old round church, very aware that we constructed a pagan space within a Christian one. We marked out the area around the stage and the PA with candles, effectively creating a magic circle put a screen behind us showing glitching black and white images to ensure an immersive experience for the audience as well as ourselves in order to achieve a collective flow state. So we were all in that moment together. This was a perfect gig. They don't happen very often. And it was also a turning point. Afterwards, a couple of people said to myself and Manea, who plays keys and does the operatic vocals, they said, "You look like witches." It was then that we realised that our ritual occultation had taken on a different face. It was no longer what we thought it was, that of apophatic liturgy, but it was we were becoming witches performing our craft and our chemical creation of sonic abyss. Thank you. Okay, well, seeing as I'm running out of time, I'm just going to have to scoot through this next section. Okay, so that's what we look like when we're on stage. This is an incredible photographer called Esther Segarra, who's one of the most well-known extreme metal photographers. This was done, if anyone knows Northampton, this was done in Delapree Abbey, just around the corner from here. This is also where we did the video shoot. Okay. So it's something that I actually call Malefica, which is the witch and matrifocal representation in black metal. And yes, we might well have been called witches, but what does that really mean when we're on stage? We've come from a kind of Christian Catholic upbringing. I'm ex-convent girl. I'm also a recovering Catholic. That tells you quite a lot. And how we get to the point we're at now is that we realise that when we were on stage, I kind of got blissed out without realising what that really meant. And it was only when I stopped playing and got off stage that my normality descended again, and I went, oh, I'm me again. What an odd and incredible experience. This is what I term my flow state. This is completely in alignment with what Charmaine is talking about, and it only happens when I am performing. Okay, this cannot happen in any other way. So if you were to ask me to scream now, I couldn't do it, because I'm not in that position, I'm not in that flow state. And also, we see a doubling of the self. So obviously I can't perform Denigrata herself, which is who I am in the band, versus Jazz or Jasmine, popular music lecturer or, whatever. There has to be that kind of extreme separation. And some of the accoutrements that we use, so for example, we dress up when we're on stage, we wear corpse paint, we wear wigs, I wear antlers on stage, and Manea wears crow feathers. And this is something that I call the animalium. So it's that kind of rejection of that normativity and that stepping into that kind of occult flow state. So for me, Denigrata is my flow state. We see this kind of spitting out of an internalized plague that for me has come from subjective transformation through surviving domestic violence. But this speaks to all women, because we all have to live within patriarchy. And as far as I'm concerned, it can get fucked. Okay, so So actually, the last thing that I'll just kind of leave you with, in flow, experience seamlessly unfolds from moment to moment. The individual operates at full capacity. The state is one of dynamic equilibrium. This is exactly what I experience when I'm on stage with Denigrata. They are my family. And in order for us to perform in Denigrata, we need to access and maintain the flow state until that performance is over. That's actually quite difficult. Playing extreme metal is really hard. This distorts our temporal experience and lifts us out of ourselves. And if anything is worth doing, it's that. This is our sacred spiritual practice. Thank you very much.
I ditched most of the paper. It's fine.
There's a chap there. Do you need the microphone? Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Is there a microphone? Okay, so I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you very much for your talk. Very interesting, the flow both on the pagan aspect and on the black metal aspect. I'm a practitioner in paganism, but I'm also a listener of black metal in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I can definitely relate with the duplicity that you have in both areas in terms of the flow state. So when you are in a ritual with other people, or even on your own, where you know what you are doing, everything flows in a way that you are more than the sum of your parts.
Yes.
Everything combines in a way that is very, very fluid, and also very meaningful.
Indeed.
It sparks ideas from you, and it sparks connections and associative thinking that you don't usually in your normal state achieve.
Precisely.
And with black metal, what I found is that you have this kind of very harsh spirits where the drum is very hard and it can get into a bit of a frenzy state, like an monodinic Norse god frenzy state. But you have these other very melodic parts where you have the chorus, and even in your installation there, you have this kind of very kind of divine girl chorus that really speaks to the soul. And that kind of interaction also, to me, it led to that kind of flow state where I'm inspired. I have this kind of inspiration like Odin has in terms of linking things and being about myself, being about the world, being about academic papers and ideas that come across me. And I was going to ask, in terms of your experience as a listener, in terms of the black metal bands, if instead of being very concentrated on the singing and the guitar playing, if you as a listener have also had some kind of flow experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think that for me, it's the third wave. It's the more kind of transcendental black metal. So for me, it's definitely Wolves in the Throne Room. That if you don't know that band, oh my God, listen to them. They are just the most extraordinary band. So yes, they have blast beats and yes, they have screaming, but their guitar work is actually kind of shoegaze indie kind of stuff. I mean, yes, it's all tremolo picked, but because of that, you find that your ears start blissing out. And whilst you're kind of focusing and concentrating, you get transported to this kind of otherworldly unsound and you exist there. And it's a very odd experience because you're aware that it's what you're listening to is extreme, but it's enveloping and kind of comfy at the same time, which is a very strange thing.
And I was just saying, obviously, you have lyrics that are also in the context of your cosmology or what you are working on, that will also add to the experience as well, because you are guided into that kind of experience.
Well, the first album, the Requiem Mass, we took all the original lyrics from a Requiem Mass. It was Mozart's Requiem Mass in D minor, and so everything I scream is in Latin. That's not easy, by the way.
So there's a question at the back.
Hi, thank you so much for these papers. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about the difference between the apophatic and the magical or the witchy philosophy. That felt like to you, but also in terms of what you imagine them to be doing in the world.
Yeah, sorry, I can't see. I'm getting blinded by that. Well, I think it very much, being the kind of recovering Catholic ex-convent schoolgirl kind of thing, I realised that actually within the band, that wasn't just me, that was kind of all of us. We were all kind of recovering from that particular kind of education when we were younger. So black metal, anyone that is interested in black metal, Per talked about this yesterday, in fact, that, you know, particularly 90s black metal really, really hates Christianity, burns down churches, it just really hates it. And so I suppose we didn't want to necessarily fall immediately into the kind of similar trappings. We wanted to be a bit more subversive and a bit more clever about it. We're not going to go burning down any churches. So for us, a really important black metal scholar is Dr. Niall Scott, and he came up with the concept of apophatic liturgy, and we suddenly realised, oh my God, that's what we're doing. I mean, yes, I may be obsessed with requiems, but that's purely a musical preoccupation rather than any kind of, you know, anti-religious thing. But we realised that actually the more we were involved with it, it became more apophatic. But that was the point where we realised then, particularly myself and Manea, that our engagement was starting to change, and how people were engaging with us was helping that transformation along. And we realised very quickly, probably within the space of the album release and doing the video, courtesy of Cavan, that we realised that it was much more to do with crafting and digging deep within ourselves. And that is what black metal is about. Mm-hmm. You stand before the altar of black metal, you really have to know yourself, otherwise you get identified as a fake, and you don't go any further than that. So it requires a lot from you. And I think, having done the work with Charmaine now, that identifying how the flow state works and actually how that's become a feminist methodology for us, that because we're so kind of anti-patriarchal, that of course we're witches. Why wouldn't we be? Hope that kind of answers your question.
Question over there.
I'll stand up and I'll shout. I mean, this is obviously something that you probably know, is that another application flows in sports psychology. Mm-hmm. And what I was thinking also, particularly in strength sports, where you do have the element of ritual, where you have a setup, particularly on deadlift, you see people doing these really weird kind of, you know, pre-deadlift setups. And I don't know if anybody saw Eddie Hall's record break with 500 kilo deadlift, but he was definitely in flow then, because he made lifting 500 kilos of the floor against that is where you really kind of need to be in the right mindset, because your first thought is, I'm not going to get that off the floor.
No.
If you're in that mindset, you will fail.
Precisely. And it's
And it's also interesting that with the sort of link with music is that it seems to be, I mean, I don't listen to music when I'm training, I don't really like it, but a lot of people do. And the two genres that they seem to listen to, a lot of people listen to metal when they're training, and the other thing that a lot of people listen to is rap. And I think that's interesting, because when you're rapping, you have to be in flow, otherwise your rap is going to sound completely rubbish.
exactly.
That's more sort of a, just an observation.
No. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mention ritual before sports. I'd like to talk to you later about that. That's very interesting.
That'd be good.
I think so.
Anyone else? Yes.
Sorry, I just came in at the end of this. It sounded amazing what I picked up. This idea of flow, perhaps you explained already, but is it like when you're kind of opening up to allow what's there to flow through you?
Yes, so the way that people most commonly understand it is when you say you're kind of in the zone and everything just works. You're entirely focused on what you're doing. You don't have to think about what you're doing. It all just works and it flows. So I think a lot of people do see it as opening up and almost channeling something, and it just seems because you're not aware of yourself, you lose that self-consciousness, and because you don't really have to think about what you're doing, I think it very much does feel almost like you're not there and you're not consciously doing anything. So it has that feeling, and I think that's why we can see flow in magic, where essentially you're doing that, and in musical performance.
Well, if I could just add to that, but it's not like you can just get into the flow state. No. You have to prepare, because if you don't prepare, you're going to fuck up massively. It's like you're not going to go on stage if you can't play guitar. You just don't do it. It's you just couldn't bear the embarrassment. So exactly with ritual, with casting a circle, with getting on stage, and you have to make sure that you're prepared, but not just physically. You've got to make sure that you're mentally in that space, because if you're feeling bad before you go on stage, you're going to do a bad gig, because you're not going to be feeling it. You have to make sure that you're mentally preparing yourself before you go anywhere near the venue.
Just specifically in that context, when you were speaking about your work with Denny Butler, I was very reminded of work I've done with the Hume ancient ritual.
Oh.
The embodiment of the spirit. Work with takes a long time. Build up a relationship with a particular spirit that wants to come through, and then enter into a ritual space where they ride you, I guess.
Yeah, oh my God, I'd actually like to talk to you more about that, actually. But I think the difficult part of me, Sham knows this, but the difficult part of me talking about this is kind of what my genesis point was of experiencing domestic violence. This is not, I'm not an anomaly. This is, most women. Yeah, exactly. And because of that, you realise then that achieving some kind of subjective transformation, you have to do it. Because what are you going to do if you don't? So actually, this was a healing process, and the more Charmaine and I talked, and we realised that we had so much in common, but from very different perspectives about what happens when we achieve that flow state, that I would not have healed if it hadn't have been for black metal. I don't know how many people can say that. It's a bit of an odd one, but there it is.
But I think to pick up on that point as well about flow being healing, the research shows that flow is a fantastically positive state for us to be in. The more that we can access flow, the happier we are, the more beneficial we are, the more beneficial it is. Flow is kind of a very beneficial, helpful, and dare I say a healing state. So if we can talk about the different ways that people can access it, the different variations of accessing it, and the rituals that can help us to access it, then it can only be for people's benefit, really.
All right. And on that happy and positive note, we need to move on to the next presenter.
Thank you.